And now, Episode 3, The Hannings and Life on Francis Street. As I've told you, much of elementary school at Pearland is just gone, dust in the wind, for whatever reason. Though, my memories of the time I spent in the then new middle school are pretty clear, and there seem to be a good many of them. Now, I really do wish that my parents had purchased those yearbooks. I was never really big on buying them as a boy. Now, that may have been merely because my mother and father both never really liked or showed interest in buying them, or I was just following their lead because our family was on a strict budget and so frugal that that was seen as a frivolous expenditure. Whatever the reason, I am working without a net here. If I get some dates wrong or some places wrong, please be kind. One of my very first memories of middle school and the new building was the smell. It didn't have the same smells as the high school, middle school campus. Those buildings had been there for some time and had very distinct smells. The lockers were the old wooden ones without locks. Boy, that's a statement. And shiny brass handles. I liked the old lockers. The new building, when you could smell something, smelled of fresh construction materials. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was very happy that we had a new building. The chairs were new, the blackboards were new, the lockers were new, and it was the newest building I'd ever seen since I'd arrived at Pearland besides my own home. One of the biggest downsides was that it was dark. There was hardly any natural light in the whole building. This took me off guard and kind of gave the school a prison shining, if you'll pardon me. Everything, everywhere, had this greenish tinge. Where this struck me most was in the cafeteria gym. I distinctly remember going into the cafeteria for lunch the very first time. Standing in the line to get food, well, it all looked so unnatural. None of the foods looked the right colors. People's faces looked ghoulish and without natural tones and hues. It took me quite some time before I could eat in that cafeteria. The first day, I picked at the food and tossed most of my lunch. The problem was the lights, especially in the cafeteria. They had these huge gas lights in the ceiling, and I'm not sure what they were. I mean, like argon, xenon, neon. I don't know what gas or element they used, but it gave off the single most unnatural light I had ever seen. Now that I'm thinking about this, did anyone else notice these lighting? I mean, then again, I still hadn't at this time found a clique to be a part of in Pearland. I had been in Pearland for about a year and just hadn't bonded with much of anybody. Now, don't get me wrong, it was me. I was a major reason, I'm sure, that I hadn't found a group, like, goths, jocks, nerds, dweebs. A group to fit in, to hang with. The good news was that I really liked books. As I remember, it seemed like everything was new. All the textbooks and the books in the library and the books in the classrooms all looked to be new and never used. I really enjoy books. I always have. I enjoy reading. So that was welcome and enjoyable. The floors were brand new and shiny, and they lent themselves for sock skating. And I indulged my thirst for all things comic and funny by regularly kicking off my shoes and skating to my heart's desire. The lockers worked well and didn't smell like the last person's gym socks. That was a good thing. The classes were all inside. I remember the last year at the old middle school, they had these temporary buildings, these like double wide trailers. Ugh. I disliked those classrooms for many reasons. Now, what was totally incredible, absolutely phenomenal, and wonderful? The teachers. That's what. There seemed to be an energy level and excitement among them that I hadn't seen before. I enjoy learning, and I have ever since I was young. The only classes that ever frustrated me or really challenged me, spelling. Sorry, but just way too much rote and no rhyme or reason. Math, totally nailed it, often helping my friends in class. Just dug math. Science, without a doubt, one of my favorite classes, and I always made A's or B's. History was then, as it is now, a subject that I could easily devote the rest of my life to in the pursuit of and be the happiest little Danny the world has ever seen. Except, of course, I would want to act. I joined choir in the 3rd grade at Matting. I can't sing alone worth diddly, but put me in a choir and it was like a duck to water. I sang in every choir every year from that year forward until I graduated. It is what got me through the nearly daily beatings in gym class. From the time I got to middle school until I got on stage my sophomore year, I was pretty much bullied. It happened, I lived. But my point is, choir made the pain go away. Anyone else remember? Okay, here's something. Does anyone else remember the woman that was the choir teacher in the brand new school? She was only there 1 year. It was like our 8th grade. First year in the new building. She sang with the Houston Grand Opera and took her class to see Madame Butterfly, which she performed in, by the way. She was completely eccentric and larger than life, and I thoroughly enjoyed the year I had her, and I was her student. At the end of the year, some of us in the choir gave a performance of, see if you remember this, If I Were a Rich Man. It was at night, and parents were there, as well as other children. And it was in that darn ghoulish cafeteria, but the lights were out, and it was dark, but it looked normal. Right then and there, on that makeshift stage, in front of many parents and children in Pearland, I took my choir experience and added something. This something would occupy the next 4 years of my life and education and have some effect or other on the entire rest of my life. She, the choir teacher, had cobbled together a rather convincing costume. A fake beard, a prayer shawl, a yarmulke, my budding baritone voice, and a pair made of brass, and something happened. That, my dear viewers, was the single most fun I'd had in my life to that point, and I never wanted it to end. During the period of time the Hannings arrived in Pearland and the last days of middle school, the Hanning rituals continued like clockwork. However, in the garage, things changed. The world outside was changing in big ways. The last few years the Hannings were in Houston, my eldest brother was taken from us and sent to Vietnam. Those were difficult times for the Hanning family. The whole time he was there and we were in Houston, the whole family would sit down and record letters, small reel audio tapes, and we'd send them to Ken. We would all take turns talking to him, and then Dad would mail it, and we would wait to hear back from Ken. Sure enough, 3-4 weeks later, there in the mail would be our reply tape. We would all gather back at the table and sit and listen to Ken talk and tell us of how things were going in Vietnam, what he saw, what he was doing. I loved hearing his voice. I was like 7 or 8 when he left for Vietnam. I wasn't anywhere old enough to be ready to have anyone taken from the family. And Ken was the cool one. Then, starting in Pearland, we didn't need tapes anymore. My father had invested a great deal of time, and my time, nights and weekends, and money totally upgrading his ham radio antenna and transmitter. Well, I could go on and on about this project, and I really could. It was incredible, but I won't. Suffice to say that when my father was through, through, we could clearly transmit and receive ham radio, single sideband, and shortwave to Vietnam. My father and I now spent hours and hours in the garage working on connecting parents here in America with their sons in Vietnam. They were called phone patches, or a phone patch. And we worked most every night connecting members of families with their children. It wasn't part of the electronic repair business, and we didn't do it for the money, though the upgrades, the money for the upgrades did come from the electronics. And my dad, he never asked for money from the people. So I worked with my dad, and I sat beside him every night while he did something pretty darn incredible. Out of his garage. Nobody ever knew. And yet it touched so many lives across the nation. I won't lie, my life was not a Norman Rockwell print by any stretch of the imagination. Quite honestly, the time that Dad spent in the garage, and no doubt the financial investment, put a strain on my parents' relationship. I know now that some holidays things might have been tight, but only because my father had spent more money on the antenna or the transmitter than they budgeted for. I didn't know that at the time. I mean, I was part of the investment. I was out there helping him connect. The next adventure I had with my father was this space race. Remember that? It captured both our imaginations. And before the moon landing was over, many a night's sleep was lost. Many a roll of film had been developed, and many a bedtime had been missed. But like with the phone patches and electronic repairs before this, the adventures always outweighed the risk. Thank you for reading, if you're reading this. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for all your kindness and support. You know we're still continuing the campaign, and any contributions are greatly appreciated. Thank you very much, and may God bless.